Balzer's father lost not a moment, but ran to a hill near the house, upon the top of which stood a large stack of dry grass, leaves, and wood, placed there for the purpose of signalling the neighbors in case of distress. He at once put fire to the dry grass, and soon there was a blaze, the light from which could be seen for miles around. Mr. Brent immediately crossed the river, and leaving Tom Fox behind to guide the neighbors, walked rapidly in the direction of the place where Balzer and Linny had last been seen. He took with him the dogs and a number of torches which he intended to light from a tinder-box if he should need them. The neighbors soon hurried to the Brent home in response to the fire signal, and several of them started out to rescue the children, if possible. If help were to be given, it must be done at once. A night in the woods meant almost certain death to the boy and girl, for besides bears and wolves there had been for several weeks a strolling band of Indians in the neighborhood. Although the Indians were not brave enough to attack a settlement, they would be only too ready to steal the children, did they but have the opportunity. These Indians slept all day in dark, secluded spots, and roamed about at night, visiting the houses of settlers under cover of darkness for the purpose of carrying off anything of value upon which they could lay their hands. Recently, several houses had been burned, and some 20 miles up the river a woman who had been found killed near the bank. 2 children were missing from another house, and a man, while out hunting, had been shot by an unseen enemy. These outrages were all justly attributed to the Indians, and if they should meet Balzer and Linny alone in the forest, heaven itself only knew what would happen to the children. A bear would be a more merciful enemy. All night Mr. Brent and the neighbors searched the forest far and near. Afterward Balzer told the story of that terrible night, and I will let him speak. I think it was after 6 o'clock when I went into the woods in pursuit of Linny and the bear. It was almost dark at that time in the forest, and a little later, when the sun had gone down and a fine drizzle of rain had begun to fall, the forest was so black that once I ran against a small tree because I did not see it. I wandered about for what seemed a very long time, calling for Linny. Then I grew hopeless and began to realize that I was lost. I could not tell from which direction I had come nor where I was going. Everything looked alike all about me, a deep black bank of nothing, and a nameless fear stole over me. I had my gun, but what use was it when I could not see my hand before me? Now and then I heard wolves howling, and it seemed that their voices came from every direction. Once a black shadow ran by me with a snarl and a snap, and I expected every moment to have the hungry pack upon me and be torn to pieces. What if they should attack Linny? The thought almost drove me wild. I do not know how long I wandered through the forest, but it must have been 8 or 9 hours when I came to the river. I went to the water's edge and put my hand in the stream to learn which way the current ran, for I was so confused and so entirely lost that I did not know which direction was downstream. I found that the water was running toward my right, and I climbed back up the bank and stood in helpless confusion for a few minutes. Nothing could be gained by standing there watching the water like a fish hawk, so I slowly walked down the river. I had been going down the stream for perhaps 20 minutes when I saw a tall man come out of the woods a few yards ahead of me and walk rapidly toward the river bank. He carried something on his shoulder as a man would carry a sack of wheat. When he reached the bank, where there was more light, I could see from his dress that he was an Indian. I could not tell what it was he carried, but in a moment I thought of Linny and ran toward him. I reached the place where he had gone down the bank, and just in time to see him place his burden in the canoe. He himself was on the point of stepping in when I called to him to stop, and I told him I'd shoot if he did not. My fright was gone in an instant, and I would not have feared all the lions, bears, and Indians I roamed the wilderness. I had but one thought, to save Linny, and something told me she lay at the other end of the canoe. The open space of the river made it light enough for me to see the Indian, and I was so close to him that even in the darkness I could not miss my aim. In place of answering my call, he glanced hurriedly at me in surprise and quickly lifted his gun to shoot me. But I was quicker than he, and I fired first. The Indian dropped his gun and plunged into the river. I did not know if he jumped in or had fallen in, but he sank immediately. I thought I saw his head a moment afterward above the surface of the water near the opposite bank, and I do not know to this day whether or not I killed him. At the time I did not care, for the one thing on my mind was to rescue Linny. I did not take long to climb into the canoe, and sure enough she was at the other end. I had not taken the precaution to tie the boat to the bank. I was so overjoyed at finding Linny, and was so eager in my effort to lift her, and to learn if she was dead or alive, that I upset the unsteady thing. I thought we should both drown before we could get out, for Linny was as helpless as if she were dead, which I thought was really the case. After a hard struggle, I reached shallow water and carried Lenny to the top of the bank. I laid her on the ground and took away the piece of wood which the Indian had tied between her teeth to keep her from crying out. Then I rubbed her hands and face and rolled her over and over until she came to. After a while she raised her head and opened her eyes and looked about as if she were in a dream. "Oh, Bowser!" she cried, and then fainted away again. I thought she was dead this time, sure, and was in such agony I could not even feel. Hardly knowing what I was doing, I picked her up to carry her home, dead as I supposed. I had carried her for perhaps half an hour when, becoming very tired, I stopped to rest. Then Lenny wakened up again, and I put her down, but she could not stand, and of course she could not walk. She told me that after she had run into the woods away from the bear, she became frightened and lost. She had wandered aimlessly for a long time, how long she did not know, but it seemed ages. She had been so terrified by the wolves in the darkness that she was almost unconscious, and hardly knew what she was doing. She said that every now and then she called my name, for she knew I would try to follow her. Her calling for me had evidently attracted the Indian, whom she met after she had been in the woods a long time. The Indian seized me and placed a piece of wood between my teeth to keep her from screaming. He then threw her over his shoulder, and she remembered very little of what happened after that, until she was awakened in the canoe by the flash and the report of my gun. She said that she knew at once I had come, and then she knew nothing more until she awakened on the bank. She did not know of the upsetting of the canoe, nor of my struggle in the water, but when I told her about it, she said, "Bowser, you've saved my life 3 times in one night." Then I told her that I would carry her home. She did not want me to, though, and tried to walk, but could not, so I picked her up and started homeward. Just then I happened to look toward the river and saw the Indian's canoe floating downstream, bottom upward, and I saw at once there was an opportunity for us to ride home, so I put Lenny down, took off my wet jacket and moccasins, and swam out to the canoe. After I had drawn it to the bank and had turned out the water, I laid Lenny at the bow, found a pole with which to guide the canoe, climbed in myself, and pushed off. We floated very slowly, but, slow as it was a great deal better than having to walk. It was just beginning to be daylight when I heard the barking dogs. I would have known their voices from among 10,000, for they were as familiar to me as the voice of my mother. It was dear old Tige and Prince, and never in my life was any voice more welcome to my ears than that sweet sound. I whistled shrilly between my fingers, and soon the faithful animals came rushing out of the woods and plunged into the water, swimming about us as if they had known as well as a man could have known that they and their master had been looking for all they knew as well as a man could have known what they and their master had been looking for all night. Bowser's father had followed closely upon the dogs, and within an hour the children were home amid the wildest rejoicing you ever heard. When Lenny became stronger, she told how she had seen the hollow in the sycamore tree and had hurried toward it to hide, and how just as she was about to enter, a huge bear raised up upon its haunches and thrust its nose almost in her face. She said that the bear had followed her for a short distance, and then for some reason had given up the chase. Her recollection of everything that had happened was confused and indistinct, but one little fact she remembered with a clearness that was very curious. The bear, she said, had but one ear. When Bowser heard this, he arose to his feet and gave notice to all persons present that there would soon be a bear funeral, and that the one-eared bear would be at the head of the procession. He would have the other ear of that bear if he had to roam the forest until he was an old man to find it. How he got it, and how it got him, I will tell you in the next chapter.